Right. So welcome to the 5th session of Biz with Engineers. Will and I are super excited today to share the stage with the illustrious RapDev team here to talk about the now.yaml service. We'll kind of kick things off in the same normal process as we always do. What we're talking about today may or may not include some forward-looking statements, especially as we start getting into the workshop and Q&A section. So we will remind you not to go and make stock purchasing decisions about anything that we've made here today, right? So just keep that in mind. We'll do the normal, usual agenda. As always, we're pretty informal here. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand. I'll go through and unmute or allow everyone to unmute themselves as well. So if you have questions, feel free to just jump off mute and ask whatever comes to mind as the team is going through and doing the discussion. So we'll talk through kind of why are we here, right? The goal of this and why we started Beers with Engineers is really to get together a group of ServiceNow customers who are a similar place in their, kind of cloud native journey and Kubernetes adoption, so that we can all kind of get better at how we're doing that and what that looks like, as well as share ideas around things that have been successful for us and for other customers as well. So who we are. If you haven't joined before, I'll give you the quick rundown. Mike Gallagher, I am an ITOM architect here at ServiceNow. We'll let the RapDev team introduce themselves in their section, but my background, I've done 25 plus years in tech. I always joke that if it has a 1 or a 0 in it, I've probably touched it at some point in my career. I have a propeller head. I love to solve business problems with tech. And I'm super focused right now on Kubernetes cloud native technology as it relates to ServiceNow's IT operations management solution. My side things that I do, I'm actually in Brazil right now with my family and have been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and playing board games. So I got all of that wrapped up in like the last couple of weeks here. So Will, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, sir. Will Hallam, ITOM architect. Teammate of Mike's, focusing on automation, especially in cloud native areas, cloud functions, Kubernetes, serverless, infrastructure as code, the whole 9 yards. In my personal time, I enjoy spending time with my family, playing some pickup hockey and playing video games. And given our title, I feel obligated to just share that I'll be enjoying a cold Zombie Dust Pale Ale from Three Floyds Brewery in Munster, Indiana, in this great gel-filled glass that one of my sons bought me for Father's Day. And you actually stick this in the freezer and it keeps your beverage at the optimal temperature while you drink it.
Nice. And I was remiss and forgot to introduce my beer, right? So A, because I'm in Brazil right now, and B, because it was actually a gift from a good friend of mine. I got a Brazilian beer called Roleta Russa, which is Portuguese for Russian roulette. It is a New England style IPA. And it's from they call them, cervezas extremas, which means extreme beers in Portuguese. So I'll be enjoying that today while I listen to the RapDev team talk. That being said, I think we're ready to hand it off to them.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for the intro, Mike. Will, there's a poll jumping off. So before we start off, we actually wanted to see just a quick check-in how many of you are already or are looking to or being pressured to add microservices into the CMDB. just so we can kind of get an understanding of where you are and how useful it is that what we're going to talk about. And maybe if you're not yet, it's probably going to come up. So let that run for a few seconds while I do my own intro. I'm Josh Van Harden. I'm a solutions engineer at RapDev. I've been in that role for just over a year. I've been in ITSM, ServiceNow, and other products for about 22 years. I am not the biggest fan of beer, so I will be drinking a little bit of this, which is my Claza Azul Reposado tequila. I'm a big fan of tequilas, so that's just kind of what my default would be going into. So I figured I'd take out the big special bottle for this session. If you have any questions about tequila after the session, feel free to ask me anything. I have a few more other people resources as well. So that out of the way, I think we'll do intros first. John, you want to pick it up and just intro yourself for a sec?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is John Gyra. I'm a ServiceNow architect over here at RapDev. Here at RapDev, I lead a lot of our cloud native ITOM and DevOps implementations. Been in the ServiceNow space for around 7 years. I was a little lame today. I only have water with me, so that's unfortunate, but
And I'll go real quick. Anthony Uris, head of sales at RapDev. You won't probably hear from me again today unless there's a question that I could potentially answer. Really here for moral support and to enjoy the beer. The fridge was a little bit light, so it's kind of a standard pick, but it's a Harpoon IPA out of Boston. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, nice little segue. So just as a quick 2-second intro in RapDev, we are a Boston-based firm. I'm not sure that influences the decision in beers, but we've been in this space. We started about 3 some years ago, very focused on DevOps. And from there, we've expanded in anything that's cool engineering-wise, which includes things like the DevOps module itself, integrations around it, making ServiceNow in general work in a cloud-native environment. I think the thing we want to talk about today, what we've done with what we call the now.yaml solution, so I think is a good example of our engineering approach and mindset. And love to take your feedback or any questions you have on it as well. It's going to be mostly a technical session, so some demo. John will walk you through it, some of the stuff, so how we configured it and why it's there. Having said that, 2 seconds on the intro. I don't know, John, if you want to share. We have one slide, and I apologize for that, but it was the anyway to bring that up. So as we segue, so this is kind of the decomposition of the things we're going to talk about today. And judging by the poll, I think we're, with exception of 2 people, this might be a really good topic. Oh, I stopped sharing. There we go. So what you see here is just the decomposition. So we're the design that we have that drives this is we want to be able to, from any code repository, whether it's a product orientation, or project, GitHub, Bitbucket, Azure repos, wherever this lives, to be able to have teams define their services, the things that they are working on, their microservices and their relationships in their repo, standard YAML file. We ingest that, we suck it into ServiceNow. We do validation against this. So depending on how risk averse or tolerant your organization is and how much is predefined or not, so how much control and governance there is, we do validation against that file that leads to output being it's great, it's not great, this failed, this is great, or this is good. And also the creation of the CMDB entry. So for those that know, the CICD 4.0 model was released or sort of semi-released, has a whole space for the development kit, so the SDLC components. So what we have done here as well is that the ability to define those components and relationships with the existing or the pre-existing ones, like the business application, the business service, the application service, etc. And also on the back of that, because of the definition, automatically generate application services, tag-based application services that start working and basically creating the service mapping view for that as soon as we've successfully ingested that file. That's the slide, that's the intro. So from here, it's all tech and ServiceNow hands-on. So I'll hand it off to John. If you have any questions, we have a QA, and I think people are able to unmute themselves as well. So feel free to do that. And looking forward to a good interactive session.
All righty. Thanks, Josh. All right, so I'm going to be walking through the demo. So in here, I have a code repository up, and I'm actually going to be committing two different files to this code repository. And just before we get going, I just want to show you over here we have two business applications that we're going to be dealing with, RapDev.io and RapDev chatbot. Currently, there's no SDLC components, and there are no tag-based application services, just to show that we're not faking anything over here. So first off, so let me go ahead and get up this sample file that I have, and let me put it in here, and then I'll talk about it. So I'm just going to create a new file. Okay. So this is our base now.yaml schema. There's a couple different things in here that will go ahead and map to the different components that we have inside of your CSDM. The first thing we have over here are the business applications. Here, and this is where Josh had mentioned before, depending on how flexible your organization is, we have the flexibility of either dynamically creating things on the fly or having certain validations in it where the things that you denote here have to already exist inside of the CMDB, and we're able to update them, et cetera, et cetera. It all depends on the level of control you want in your organizations, but it's easily flexible. We can make the appropriate amount of changes. And you can see here, we were able to update, certain fields as we put in the YAML file. The main thing is the microservice. Each YAML file inside of each now.yaml file inside of the code repository represent a microservice. The one here that we have is, we're just calling it RapDev Web. And with it, this is where the business applications tie in. We put in there what business applications consume the microservice. That way, inside of ServiceNow, we can go ahead and map them up to the business application, taking advantage of the actual CSDM hierarchy using the correct relationships. We also put some ownership information here around microservice as well. And then down below is where we list out all the different environments in which the microservice has been deployed in. What this will do is create different tag-based application services based off of each environment that you denote here. And what we also do is, we have a place where you can denote the tags for what we can expect to make up that service. So for example, and this is because it ties into tag-based service mapping. So when we go out and discover your cloud infrastructure, whether it's hosted in AWS, Azure, GCP, Kubernetes, whatever it is, if we go ahead and find whatever tags that you denote here, we can then automatically map those up to, for example, the RapDev Web prod microservice. And this is just, the out-of-box capabilities of tag-based service mapping. But here, we're able to do this automatically through the YAML file ingestion, and no one has to set any of this up inside of ServiceNow, which is currently the case of, most people have to do. So what I'm going to do now is, so we have the file here. I'm just going to go ahead and commit this. And just give it a couple of seconds, and we'll see it pop. Yep, we already see it populated over here. So you can see this went ahead and got created. We have the proper ownership fields there. On the business application, you can see owners either populated or changed. Beforehand over here, I had them as Josh, but with the YAML file, I went ahead and changed them. And you can see there were 3 different tag-based application services that were created because those were the 3 different environments that we specified. But let me actually go into this SDLC component, because I think it looks a little bit better when we see it in dependency views. So here we have that SDLC component, which was our microservice. And you can see upstream, we have the 2 business applications where, it contains the microservice. And then downstream from the microservice, we have, the actual, the logical representation of each environment for RapDev Web. We have development, test, and production. Now, all these relationships down below is what I was talking about a little while ago, where based off the tags that were there, the service was RapDev Web, the environment was production. So using the tag-based service mapping capabilities of ServiceNow, all of these relationships were automatically linked to that tag-based application service. So you can see here, there's different Kubernetes components. We can see some Kubernetes pods. I think over here, maybe it was to the left. Yeah, over here, we can also see this is actually an EC2 that came out of AWS. So, based off of what you're actually discovering and where your infrastructure is hosted, we're able to bring in, a lot of different technology stacks under the same solution. So in terms of the validation, that we were talking about, how do we know things got properly processed? Were there any errors with it? We want to have that feedback loop to the developers so that they know, if they have to make any changes, et cetera. So what we have here is an integration into Slack. So right up above here, we have, basic information about the commits, where it came from, who made it. And you also can see each different element broken down to what happened. So you can see for this respective business applications, their ownership information was updated, it was changed. We can see the RapDev web microservice was created. We can see the application services were successfully processed. And we can see the relationships were properly created for the said entities. So, and you can see here, it is, a very clean data structure so that we can easily consume it in a lot of different areas. We can do it via Slack, email, we can even have it pushed up to AWS, SNS, and EventBridge. There's a lot of different capabilities that we're able to go around here. So, this was an example where there were no errors at all. But I just want to show you really quick what would happen if there were some errors inside of the YAML processing. So I'm just going to create another file really quick. And with this one, you can see, because again, this goes back to how flexible your organization is if you want to create things on the fly, if you need validations. So for here, you can see here, it's just a typo. I fat fingered it. Instead of doing rapdev.io, I did rapdev.ip. This will throw an error because in our system currently, we have a rule that you can't just create business application on the fly. They have to already exist. For this microservice, you will see that it goes ahead and will get created. But one of these environments here is not a valid environment for, in our organization. So we also do that type of validation as well. So I'll go ahead and commit this. And here we go over here. And so we have the RapDev shard, and you also see that it doesn't have ownership information here. So just say if someone's looking in ServiceNow, seeing what's going on, let's go over to the Slack channel. Give it a second over here to fire off. And here we go. So now we can actually see, what was actually going on with this. So here we can clearly see, okay, the business application didn't exist. All right, the business application was not updated. Obviously, there's no relationships created for it because it doesn't exist. And we also do proper validation too with users or groups, right? Because those are the ones that really describe the ownership of the said entities. So for here, that actual user, the email that we specified for that user didn't exist, so we can't populate it there. There's no active group, so there's no user group in ServiceNow. That wasn't there. Again, like I was saying, for the SIT, it's not a valid environment, so there was no tag-based application service created for that as well. And again, this is where it gets into the flexibility, where in our use case, we wanted to be able to process as much as possible and not do, if one little thing was wrong, to completely fail the entire process. We wanted to, ingest what we could, but then communicate back out those errors to, the people who are either committing the file or, subscribe to whatever event bus, where this information is being sent. All right, so that concludes our demo. Josh, I'm not sure if you have anything to add before we turn it over to some Q&A.
No, I think definitely Q&A. I also want to see if we can show some of the variation. The other thing I wanted to call out, just more going into the engineering, and John kind of touched on it. So the reason why we built now.yaml, obviously we saw that there was a need, but also in the design, and that's something I want to give everybody on this call as well to contemplate, is the general trend is, right, you need to incorporate your DevOps teams, your app dev teams, or whatever you call them, your digital or DTC, incorporate them into the processes that run on ServiceNow, but ideally keeping them away from standard ServiceNow UI interface. Keep them in their environment, keep them working on the stuff that they're familiar with, but empower them to interact. So this is one example where developers or product owner, whoever defines this YAML file in the repo, they put all the stuff they care about in there, and everything on the back of that is automated away from them. So they don't leave their IDE, they don't leave their repos, they don't leave the environments they care about. And on top of that, you can think of ways of automating that, like a pipeline to build new pipelines when you do project initiation or new product initiation, right, where the pipeline builds or creates the repo, creates the core files in there, creates all the setup for the users. This is a perfect setup, including that. So that's kind of the step up. And we do some other initiatives, but I won't go into that. But the essence here is that shift left, move away from do everything yourself and include these teams, empower them, or as a team, claim the empowerment, say, I know what's going on the best in my environment. Let me define what's important. And then you ingest it and do with it on the back of it what you will. I see that Christopher raised his hand. I think you can unmute.
Yeah, just
Yeah, Chris.
quick question, hopefully. So, your output to Slack and whatever message bus, that's pretty cool. Just wondering, included in that, is it kind of built in the way that you've set it up, or, obviously someone could make changes, but to be able to kick off, let's say, a flow or a workflow in the background to be able to then, assign an incident out to the team to remediate some particular thing, et cetera, et cetera. Is that?
Yeah, definitely. That is definitely possible. And that is actually something that we've had some customers do sometimes. There's actually one customer I'm actively working on where, for them, it was more of a strict, everything had to be right in order for everything to get in. But if there was a dynamic incident created from that, and it was, go ahead and assign to, the appropriate parties. We knew the committer. We know what repository it came in, we knew when it was committed, because we have all that metadata about the commit. So then they're able to go back and be like, okay, this actually didn't make it into the CMDB. I have to go look at my YAML file and make the appropriate changes. And it lists out very, very specifically what went wrong. It's not just saying, like you saw in the Slack channel that I had open, it says very specifically what was wrong so that they're able to go ahead and rectify it. And all that they need to do is just make another commit. It'll get reprocessed, whatever the file then is. And, if it's good, then we're good to go.
Is there any way included in that to verify the file before you actually attempt to do anything with it? Like I commit it and pre-process it, essentially, checking it for errors?
Yeah, so and that's what we do, at least on the ServiceNow side. That's what we do for this one specific customer that I was talking about. So nothing actually makes it into the CMDB. There's a bunch of validation that happens beforehand. And if we see, again, there's a bunch of different validation rules that could be into place, but we check all the different validation, possibilities. If there's any sort of error, we go ahead and put those, into our proper list and communicate it out, and we don't add anything to the CMDB.
Right. I more was wondering, like, as a developer, I want to commit my YAML file and say, I don't actually want to do anything right now, but I want to make sure that it's going to work when I push it in. It's
Like a dry run option?
Like a dry run or a lint.
Yeah, the capability for sure is there. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and you can simulate it.
Oh yeah, good call. I see Zach's got a question as well. In the
I was going to wrap
Q&A,
that
it
in.
says, "What is the state after the?" Yeah, good question.
No worries. Yeah, and I'll your connections to go, Mike. So I think the question Zach chatted, you put it in chat. What's the state after this error laden commit? So what went in, what didn't, and how do you make it right? So I think in the current approach and the current setup, and there's different variations, but the way we default position it is that the update itself, as it comes in, we process it in line, so to speak. So we don't give it, it's a stateless processing with a feedback on what was success or failed. And you can have the hard level where you say everything needs to be good before I process, or like we show by default, we process the pieces that we can. So between that, that will generate that output. But once that output is generated, we are not keeping track of previous versions or iterations of that file that is in the repo that sits there. One thing to consider, right? We in this example, we're just pulling it from the repo, but you can apply things like DevOps config to this file. You can apply additional testing or pipeline-based validations to this file. So it's not we drop it somewhere in a location and we pull it into ServiceNow and that's it. It's you can now make this file subject to your regular DevOps processes as part of your build processes and validation processes. So you're not tied to doing everything in ServiceNow. The file itself has a lifecycle within the repo, and you can do things in that context that precede ingesting it into ServiceNow as well. So that's maybe I think a key thing also to remember, right? We're not trying to solve everything on the platform. We're trying to solve for how do we get data in a certain state to do all the things that we needed to do in ServiceNow to remove that burden or the toil on the admin side of ServiceNow and to remove the overhead for the developers. I hope that made sense.
I had a question about what's your endpoint for triggering the piece that occurs on ServiceNow? Is it just like standard webhook that you configure into your pipeline? So whenever a commit goes in, you just hit endpoint on the instance, or?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So they are webhook based in terms of the endpoints that exist. So we have two different flavors of the now.yaml. One that it ties into the actual DevOps product that ServiceNow offers, because with that product, we are already ingesting all of the commit data. So we piggyback off of that endpoint that is already there, and we make the proper callouts. We also have a non-DevOps product version, in which case we have created our own endpoint. Very similarly, we ingest the push events that are coming into ServiceNow whenever a commit is made. So in terms of how to trigger on the appropriate file, because you can have hundreds, thousands of commits, right, against any sort of repo in your org. So what we go ahead and do is we have two different properties that are configurable. One of them is for the file name. So we say that the file name has to match a certain regex. By default, we just say now.yaml, but it's configurable, whatever the naming convention you want to be for these files. The other one is the branch, because developers are probably making changes in whatever sort of feature branches they have. A lot of times, and what we have as default, we have it as being only when it is committed against your main or master branch. But again, it's going to differ based off the use case and the organization. It's very flexible, can be configured. So in essence, what happens is developer makes a commit, for a particular file in a certain branch. We get that webhook payload event inside of ServiceNow. We check the file name, we check the branch, and if it matches those properties, we go ahead up into the Git repo. We retrieve the contents, and it's a YAML file, right? So we actually have to then convert that to JSON, and then because you can't really work with YAML inside of ServiceNow, so we convert it to a JSON object. We can very easily work with that, and then we go ahead with the validation and the processing. And the YAML to JSON is actually an application that RapDev built. It's actually available on the ServiceNow store for free.
That is good to know, because I faced that YAML challenge myself.
Yep.
So just to reiterate, because it's kind of an important point, I think, you guys don't have a dependency on the ServiceNow DevOps config module functionality, whatever. If the customer has it, then great, you tie into that, but it's not a requirement on your part to take advantage of this functionality.
Correct.
Cool.
I think Zach posted an update, so let's update question, follow-up question. So I'll try and condense it a little bit, but I think it's a valid question. The question is, if pieces fail, right, then why am I still ingesting something? I think it's a short summary. I think the question there is also has to do with fault tolerance in the organization, right? There is, from when we implement and when we look at how ServiceNow can be deployed, just having a let's say an SDLC component with a tag-based application service underneath it that can be used to identify events that are coming into event management, use that for correlation and suppression, finding the right assignment group or identifying that service relationship, that by itself can already be valuable. So depending on how structured the organization is, having some or all of these pieces processed by itself will constitute value. The same as, let's say, the business application is correct, but some other information is missing. If we can process ownership change automatically, even though that maybe the primary support group change didn't come through, we still have a valuable piece of information that we're progressing. So it's in that sense more of an eventual consistency, right? If, give me some leeway there, but it's like we're processing the data we can, because that is truest to the nature of the push that we're getting, right? The information update that happened. Failures are communicating back and can be corrected by the developer, the same as, right, you have a bad line of code, it fails a test, the test tells you this failed or this piece failed. Depending on the type of failure or errors that come out of your testing, there's always a choice, right? So in our case, we still process it and it goes back for next iteration or updates if it fails. But again, if an organization doesn't like that because they're more strict in their definition, they just flip the switch all the way to the left. Any failure leads to complete rejection, and it still gets the same output. So you still see the pieces that are good or bad, but the entire file is not getting processed. So you still have granularity, but we want to make sure that you can facilitate anything, right? Just in time or just enough or some good information can be better than no information. So there's and I think that kind of touches, I won't go into too much of the principles there, but it kind of touches on, to some extent, the balance you need to strike between traditional CMDB controls and management, but also we need to get code out into production fast and it needs to work, and that's the key component. Some working or good working is better than best working if that takes more cycles. So it's in that same nature that we do allow, and we want to keep allowing, that ability to toggle between just process what you can and don't process anything.
So how are those knobs adjusted? Is it tables, properties? How is that managed within the ServiceNow instance as far as how tolerant to deviation the process is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's just a property as well. So currently we only have 2, but again, if once doing an actual implementation, you're actually trying to do this more, you can actually put it more into the code, because it's kind of hard to control more than just the 1 or 2 where it's process as much as you can, or any sort of failure go on, or maybe it's like a count again, because then you get really into the weeds, in which case it's more of an entire solution that you're trying to develop for the actual said organization, in which case they're going to be setting it up for everyone to consume, and they would have to go by the same standards, in which case then you can just have it inside the code itself. Because again, what we have as, especially what we showed, is just a base. Depending on the organizations, they may want to provide more information about the the said microservice, or update more about the business application, stuff about criticality, or whether something touches PCI, sensitive information. So it's just a base, it's a starting point, and then we just map it over to what they actually want to track inside of the CMDB.
Christopher updated a message. I'll read it out. If you don't, it's the question is, can different projects have different standards for that risk tolerance, or is it across the application? Is the parser at the application level? That's a great question.
Yeah, it could be, if a customer wanted to, if an organization wanted to do that, that's something that would definitely be doable, right? In that case, you would probably, we would have some sort of custom table mapping, where we have, whether it's a repo or just like a team structure, where we can say, okay, this one is, everything has to be right. This one, it's a little bit more lenient. But yeah, no, something like that is definitely doable.
Yeah, and John, we have a few more minutes. Could you talk, because we've done a similar thing, right, for a customer recent where we had different definitions of that now.yaml with some different requirements. Could you maybe talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so if you guys remember, I showed the YAML file, and actually, let me share my screen for this, get a little bit more visual. Share. So this is one iteration of our YAML file that we have. We like to call this a quote unquote non-governed solution. We also have a governed solution. So the main difference between those two is the governed solution, you don't have to provide all your information about your tags because your organization already has a tag governance in place. In which case we know everything, all your resources are tagged a certain way. So for example, if we had a governed solution here, we would actually remove everything from line 25 down. And this would be because we know that the resources will be tagged with a service and they will be tagged with an environment. And we can dynamically, as these resources come in via discovery, or, the first time that this is registered, because, we also do have like a regularly recurring scheduled job just to make sure, anything changes. But we are able to then look, okay, are any of my discovered resources tagged where, the service is what I denoted up here? And is there some environment tag? Is there one already created for it? If so, great. But if there isn't one, let's go ahead and create it. So that way, this is more dynamic. Someone doesn't have to update this file as much. They don't have to provide as much input, and we can do it as soon as we see it there. So just say that RapDev Web, it's been deployed to 3 different environments so far, and the organization introduces a new environment. Discovery picks that up. We can automatically create that, tag-based application service without someone actually having to go in here and updating the YAML file. Josh, do you have anything else to add on top of that?
Yeah, I was thinking, because I do want, actually wanted to echo that. So from a design perspective, and this is something that I think might be cool for other types of things as well, not just what we do here in now.yaml, but is the dependency right across the organization, and what John just touched on as well, right? If we have a tagging standard and you know what tags exist, and you empower and trust your teams to work towards the same goals of success and quality, right? Then you don't need to do the validation. You can just assume that if a tag comes in with an environment XYZ and an application reference of 1, 2, 3, that information means that it exists and you should support it, right? Instead of saying, oh no, it needs to be validated, we need upfront controls. You ingest it, you create it, because that's the reality that you find it in, right? That's the basis of discovery-driven or discovery-based CMDB. It's the same thing. What's out there is reality. That's what you're reporting on, that's what you're reacting on. So we take what we find, and then you can put reporting and validation on the back of that saying, does it make sense to me from a governed or oversight perspective? Is my second process honored, all that traditional ITSM stuff. But the key on this as well, driving it this way, is don't stop reality from coming into your CMDB just because maybe a process or a step was missed, right? Knowing what's really out there, knowing how it works, knowing how it's tagged is most of the times for the things we care about here, like event management and incident tagging and incident creation, more important than that it followed a certain process and we know that enterprise architecture has signed off on it. I'll get off my soapbox, but that's kind of what I do wanted to give on the back of that, right? Is reality is ultimately, especially when it comes to the CMDB, the most important thing. Is it accurately showing me what I care about? Still, and they're abstracts or entities, but is it what I care about? So that's it. Do we have? I don't think we have other questions. Anybody wants to jump in with a question? Nope.
I do. So how does a customer or a ServiceNow architect who wants to promote this to his customers actually use this functionality? Or, Last I looked, you can't just go to the store and put in now.yaml and start running it in your instance, right? What's the front door process for finding out more and, you know, potentially seeing this work inside an actual, you know, a customer's environment?
It is still currently wrapped as a services engagement. I think to the point that John raised and that we kind of articulated, there's a lot of choices you can make, and putting those programmatically in a way that it could be a store app we haven't found a good way of doing that, right, without creating a lot of maintenance overhead. So it's still wrapped into services. A lot of it is IP code, it's just code that we bring with us. But there is a services component. So like any services engagement, we have Anthony, but reaching out to RapDev saying, hey, I'm interested, would be the starting point for that, where we can look at whether the environment is relevant, although you can probably do that yourself, right? And then from there, either do ideally a pilot setup. Right? We find that showing that it works in production with a few teams, maybe very controlled use cases, but get it to work and show the value to them and show the value to your ITSM teams, that's the best way forward. So obviously any questions is welcome. We have I think a sales@rapdev.io, right, Anthony?
Yep, I just thanks, Josh. I just dropped it into the chat to everyone. You can reach out to sales@rapdev.io and the right person will reach out to you, or you can just reach out to me directly and I'll get the right people involved.
Yes. And
Awesome.
I forgot if this was 45 or an hour. Do we have some
No,
time
we're
still?
good. No.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't want to break your timelines. Because Zach just updated, and I think there's definitely Zach just posted, that might be cool to add some commands to the YAML file or things that we can process to validate or control. That's definitely the case for us. Let's say the journey around the now.yaml solution is also continuous, right? As we work with new clients, new requirements, new ideas come up, new ways of processing or implementing come up. This is definitely an idea that I would like to also extend, say how much more can we shift left, if you will, into the dev community where they take control of stuff that happens in ServiceNow in an automated, scalable fashion. So definitely a topic that we can set up and drive into, because I think there's a lot of opportunity there to, and maybe it's not just now.yaml, but other types of solutions that use a similar model, where we can actually offer a great platform for app dev and DevOps teams to interact with ServiceNow in a way that there's no overhead for them. There's value to them across the board, both in validation, keeping things up to date, but also the value like in event management, things automatically getting assigned to them back into the Jira, right? So there's a hands-off type approach, but also for ITSM to move away from we want to control every step to we're setting the principles and the guidelines, we're setting the processing rules like we do with DevOps, right? We set the policies for the change approval, but we're not doing hands-on processing, which frees up time, reduces admin overhead. So there's definitely a bunch of opportunities. And on that specific point, I'd like to see what we can do there too, because that might actually be a pretty cool next step.
So mechanically, once the solution's in place, how does the customer generally work through things like platform upgrades? Do they have basically a support relationship ongoing with RapDev, so they upgrade to Tokyo and run through now.yaml regression or whatever, and then they need advice or insight from you guys? Is that just an ongoing relationship? Is that how that functions?
Yeah, so what we've witnessed so far is, we don't have the platform upgrades don't have any negative consequences to us, because we don't alter any sort of out-of-box behavior. We use the CSDM classes that are there. We're not using any sort of custom classes like that. We're using the core components of Integration Hub. So, there's nothing really custom, because you're really running into issues, right? When you start customizing ServiceNow, when the upgrades come in, you have to revert, then reapply your changes, stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
We don't customize anything. It's all code that's built on top of what's already there, and we utilize, a lot of out-of-box scripts.
Yeah. So you guys are basically your own scoped app. I mean, maybe not
exactly,
store, but it comes in as a scoped app, and you're kind of self-contained.
Exactly. Yep. It is its own scopes app.
Nice.
Yeah, literally. And the only thing I want to add to that, because of the variation of implementation so far, and because we do it as a services engagement, there's two benefits to this. One if you put it in your organization, and Bob, I did see your hand, so give me a second, but is the code after it's deployed belongs to your instance, right? So if you want to make changes or updates or whatever, that's your prerogative. Can't resell it necessarily, right? Because there's some other things going on, but the code in your instance is your code, right? So if you want to take it to the next level, or you want to do other cool stuff to it or less cool stuff to it, that's for completely your prerogative. To John's point, we haven't run into upgrade issues, but if the CSDM changes, I mean, that would be if your own team can solve it or your platform team can solve it, then obviously we have services there, but that would be just a services engagement, because again, once the code is in your instance, it's in production, it's yours to do with. And that's one of the other reasons why we haven't looked at productizing it yet, because there's too much variation. Maybe if the world standardizes a little more across these things, so maybe a few more years of digital transformation, we might be in a spot where it makes sense to make it a store app, but that's the consideration. So.
Right. Cool.
And I think, Bob, you had your hand up, so.
Yeah, sure. You reiterated it's part of the services engagement, but I'm assuming the particular fields in the YAML file, those are flexible, or are they kind of hard coded? Like I see John shaking his head yes, so I would assume they are flexible. Okay.
Yeah.
And then two, my second question is more around the OCM factor. You're gonna provide this YAML file to a development team. They consume it, but I'm assuming it's pretty standard. Like, what's like them actually using this YAML? What's the quick? Like, is it a quick turnaround for them to learn and use? And I'm thinking at a scale perspective, right? Not just one dev team, but some of my engagements, there's hundreds of dev teams, right? So kind of talk about the scale of it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll kick it off, and John, you'll fill in based on what we did. So the ease, because it's a YAML file, and adding annotations that are customer specific seems to take away a lot of challenges so far in our experience, right? So as long as the file is annotated as part of that deployment with values or references that make sense to the developer community, we've not run into any real OCM challenges. On top of that, it is tied to the standard DevOps community. So we work, when we implement this, not primarily with the ITSM team, I should say, or the configuration management team, or the second team, whatever it's called, but with your DevOps community, or with the DevOps community. So, and usually from at least a leadership or a mid leadership down. So we have the people that drive the direction, typically have that quick communication, have places where they share knowledge, right, over Slack or in Notion, or some Atlassian tool, right? Somewhere they're keeping this data. So typically we find that because of the character, the nature of DevOps, there's not a lot of issue with getting this file deployed, or getting developers to understand how the file should be used, right? Between annotation in the file and context and knowledge references in their documentation tools. It's not a guarantee, but so far that's what we see. Yep.
Yeah, and also if we are doing this on top of the actual DevOps product implementation too, it's an added benefit incentive for developers to actually, start using this. Because when we are doing this, a lot of times these microservices don't exist currently inside of the CMDB, right? And what we do with the actual DevOps product implementations, we are automatically creating changes through your CICD pipelines. And we have to have a CI attached to those changes. The CI that's attached to those changes is actually usually the production environment of the said microservice, which gets in there from the actual now.yaml. So for them to actually use this new process of creating automated changes, them not having to go into ServiceNow to log every deployment that they're doing, it's an added incentive for them to come onto this process.
Yeah, thanks. Something else I'm just thinking out loud here. around ephemeral CIs, ephemeral resources, right? Hey, this service got spun up and I used it for a couple hours. I'm just going to, decompose the whole service. Do you guys kind of like have a way to maintain like, hey, yeah, we spun this up, and then maintain a state, right? Like, hey, this is in an operational state, and then, hey, this has been in a, I don't know, off state or whatever this state is. Like, so as part of your YAML, there's a read, and hey, I'm going to insert records. Is there a way to kind of keep the life cycle of that service? Any thoughts there?
There's a non-linear. So typically, let's start there. At this point, so creation of the services and updating the data around it is that one direction. What we find in terms of ephemeral workloads is can be flexible, right? So we can't really use discovered information to drive the status of the specific application service belonging to an SDLC component or to a microservice, because a microservice could be operationally dormant while it's still in use, because it's in its function, it's only going to work 2 weeks a year type of thing, right? There's only a demand for 2 weeks a year. So there'll be a definition, but there'll be zero resources potentially. Well, you probably have services, but it kind of depends on the tagging strategy. So, so we can't really use discovered data to decide what the state is. Currently, it's kind of based on aging out. So if the repo, like the triggers are typically if the repo gets closed out or decommissioned, or the file disappears, those are triggers that we could then use to change the state of the SDLC component. But it's really on the services definition, so the SDLC and the application service where that's relevant, not necessarily tied to ephemeral workloads or cloud resources in general.
Yeah, that's fair. Thanks for the comments.
Sure. I think we have 4 more minutes. I don't know if there's any other questions or concerns. I think we anybody have ideas? Maybe I'll do that as a closing question. Anybody who thinks that some of it, even if it's not our YAML solution, but something that they picked up to go, I'm going to try and work on that in the next couple of weeks, try and see if I can tinker something around. Nope. Okay. I think we're done. We've run out of questions. So
Yeah.
thank you.
All right.
Thank you for the participation, and Will too. Thanks for everybody for the questions. It was really good. I like the interactivity of the questions. So awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks as always to all of our attendees for keeping things lively and interesting. This is for both Mike and myself, this is like our best day of work every month. Just being able to share experiences, lessons learned, find out about cool new stuff like now.yaml. As always, we will send out a wrap up, which includes an invite to our next session next month on the 25th of August. Yeah, if there's no additional questions, please do fill out the exit poll on your way out, and have a great rest of your week. And RapDev guys, thank you so much. This has been super awesome. And again, to reach out, either, if you're interested in finding more out about now.yaml, Anthony posted the 2 direct emails, or you can always work with your ServiceNow account team to pursue it further.
Thank you, Will and Mike,
Thanks,
for hosting
everybody.
this. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.